And this journalist said to me, "Do you know that they call you the bitch?" My enemies within the party had tried so hard to bully me out of the party. I will take you down before you take me down. Part of what's gone wrong with the SNP is they haven't concentrated on how to deliver policy. It was difficult, and for a long time, while I was still a member of parliament, I was absolutely determined that I would stick with the party, despite my severe reservations about the direction the party had taken, because my enemies within the party had tried so hard to bully me out of the party, to make my life impossible in the hope that I would leave, that I would not give them the satisfaction of leaving. As I say in the prologue to the book, when I first started writing this book, I was still a member of parliament, and I had to put it to one side because I found the writing of it made it very difficult for me to stick to my resolve to hang on in there. But after I lost my seat, and after I'd finished writing the book last autumn, I reflected on everything and I decided to resign my membership, because I'm afraid to say I had become ashamed to be a member of the SNP. And in the past, I'd been proud. And when I went to Westminster, I was really proud to serve my country as a Scottish National Party Member of Parliament. But because of what had happened to the party, because of its inability to develop a workable independent strategy, its inability to take advantage of the manifold opportunities of Brexit, the Brexit crisis, its embrace of gender identity politics, its hounding out of long served members like myself, and its hounding of women in particular, the way in which the party had been run, the way in which the government had been run, the way that Alex Salmond had been treated, all these things, and the failure to acknowledge any real failings and the failure to commit to any meaningful change made me think I no longer wanted to be a member. Well, in my book, I say that there's a litany of broken promises over the last few years. We're promised a national energy company, something that really might have tackled fuel poverty. That hasn't been delivered. We were promised a national care service. My mum's in care. I've seen it firsthand, how wonderful our care workers are, but how the service struggles. And, they've not delivered that. Uh, now we've got this promise about a school bag for every kid. What happened to the iPads and the bicycles that were promised at previous elections? And I think this all plays to a tendency that I've described in my book of very performative politics, politics by public announcement. So, Nicola Sturgeon in particular had a habit of announcing things that were going to happen, and there was huge hullabaloo, and everybody thought it was terribly impressive. But then the thing itself was never actually delivered. The National Energy Company closing the attainment gap, these sorts of things. And I think part of what's gone wrong with the SNP is they haven't concentrated on how to deliver policy. They just announce that they're going to do something without actually having a strategic plan on how to deliver it.
But even small things where, and it's the context I'd love to know about, where you found out that her or her cronies were calling you the bitch.
Yeah, a journalist told me that.
I mean, and when was that? When was that? Was it round a particular issue or event? Do you remember?
Found that out when she called Margaret Ferrier Margaret COVID at a press conference. And I was talking to a journalist about it, and they said, well, that's what probably calling her behind the scenes, and it's just slipped up. And this journalist said to me, "Do you know that they call you the bitch?" So it was 2021, 2020, I found that out, late 2020. But it didn't surprise me at all. And you see, what you need to understand is this isn't necessarily just about Nicola. There were an awful lot of people whose jobs depended on Nicola remaining First Minister, her Chief of Staff, lots of her SPADs, lots of people in HQ. It was well known that if I had ever become leader, which was unlikely, or more likely if Alec had come back, there would have been a massive clear out. Because those people were there as nodding donkeys, yes men and yes women. And Alec or I would have wanted people with a bit more gumption, intellect, drive, ability to deliver strategic change. So I think there were a lot of people who who feared a Joanna Cherry leadership bid or my support for Alec, because they knew that if me or Alec got into a position of leadership, they would be out in their ear.
Mm.
So I think that's a lot of what that was about. But it was just a drip, drip, drip of constant briefing. And I went through a period, it was actually during lockdown, when the briefing was at its height, where I used to feel sick on a Saturday night because I always knew about 11 o'clock there would be something on Twitter about what was in the Sunday newspaper, something nasty about me. And the other thing that was going on was that there were so many, particularly young men in the party who were trans activists. They weren't trans themselves, but they were activists for self ID, relentlessly attacking me and trying to undermine me, um, feeding stories to the newspapers and some women as well, to be fair, but also saying really vile things about me on social media. Nobody in the party ever defended me. No disciplinary action was ever taken against those people. And of course, that feeds into what I've said about the complaints process. There was no
Yeah.
properly functioning complaints processes. Complaints were ignored unless they could be weaponized against somebody who the leadership and their cronies didn't like.
And one of the other shocking, and there are several moments in the book that, as you're reading them, was when you got wind that there was a plan to suspend you without you knowing the reasons why or indeed who the complainer was, and you decided to make a phone call. Tell me about that.
I was known as a really honest person. And I'd worked in lots of high pressure situations, never been accused of bullying before. I knew these complaints of bullying were utterly groundless. But it was all over the newspapers, and most people will think no smoke without fire. That's just human nature. So I was pretty distraught that Saturday, and Fraser, my advisor, told me that what I needed to do to save my neck was to phone up Nicola and tell her that if she didn't get in front of the cameras on the Monday morning and give me her support and say that, yes, of course, there should be an investigation, but due process should be allowed to take its course and obviously not suspend me, that if she didn't do that, I would give my letters of complaint that hadn't been dealt with to a journalist. Well, a journalist had them already and was all teed up to go with them, and I would call her a hypocrite. And that would be very embarrassing for her, but also it would have fed into the narrative at the time that perhaps the complaints against Alec had been got up against him because he wasn't flavour of the month with the leadership and other complaints were being ignored. So we had a very tense and difficult conversation, and she was very angry with me. But
What did she say? Did she swear? Did you
I
swear?
definitely swore because I was so upset.
What did you,
I said,
what swear word did you use?
I
Do
mean,
you remember?
I said something along the lines of, I've seen what you, not meaning her personally, but you and the people around you are doing to Alex Salmond, and I will not let you do it to me. I will take you down before you take me down. And I also said to her, you will understand this because you just operate in the world of politics, but I operated in a respectable profession for years and was a highly respected member of it. And I will not let you destroy my reputation, because I felt that not only would my political career be ruined, but I would go back to the bar with a real cloud over my head. So I definitely swore. Uh,
And what did she swear at you?
I cannot remember. I think she might. I know she was really unhappy, and she went off. And then she came back an hour later, and the first thing she said to me was, "Have you calmed down yet?" And I said, "No, I haven't calmed down." I said, "My whole reputation is on the line, so it's perfectly reasonable for me not to be calm." And I'm sitting at home. My phone's going constantly with the press. I'm getting no support from SNP media. Who knows? They probably leaked it. And it was just really, really difficult. And so she said she would support me, and as I say in the book, she went out. She was on some visit on the Monday morning, and journalists asked her, and she said that I was a valued member of the team, and due process must be allowed to take its course. So yeah, I mean, it's not something I ever thought I would have to do. I wouldn't say I'm particularly proud of having done it, but I had to do it to save my neck.
Would you ever go back? Would you ever want to go back?
I would consider going back if there was new leadership, but um, you know, I think what the SNP really needs is a period in opposition to reflect on what's gone wrong and to rebuild the party and rebuild the movement. and get more people involved. The caliber of people who are going to become MSPs in the next parliament is pretty low, with a few honourable exceptions. There are able people like Stephen Flynn and Alison Thewlis. I might not agree with Alison about gender politics, but I recognise her as a very hardworking and able person. I'm quite fond of Stephen Flynn. When Stephen Flynn became the leader at Westminster, he told me that as far as he was concerned, I had a conscience vote on all gender critical matters. Um, and, it was an absolute breath of fresh air compared to the way that Ian Blackford treated me. So I've got a bit of time for Stephen Flynn, but Stephen Flynn hasn't challenged any of this nonsense. And I think, in fairness to him, I think he's not a big fan of it, but just keeps away from it if he can, but has to go along with it because the party, particularly in Aberdeen, is very captured. So many good people have left the party, and it's captured by people who swallowed all this stuff, hook, line, and sinker. So I'm not saying I wouldn't consider rejoining, but at the moment I'm quite happy to be out of it.
Do you see Flynn as a potential successor, either sooner or later for Swinney?
Yeah, I think if the SNP lose a fair few seats, John will be gone, and I see Stephen as a potential successor. I think Stephen is a very canny political operator. He had the guts to stand up to Nicola. I remember how dischuffed she was when he became the Westminster Group leader, and she said something along the lines of she hadn't taken to him or something, which was really quite undermining because he was our democratic choice. And I really admired the way he set out very carefully to become the leader and to get all of our support on side. What put me off him was he made Mary Black his deputy when he became leader, and that annoyed a lot of us in the group because we felt that she was lazy and didn't really pull her weight, and we couldn't understand why he'd want to make her deputy leader. But I think he maybe did that to appease the woke section of the party. But this is not terribly original because Jim Sillars has said this. Stephen has yet to write a major policy paper or make a major speech about about meaningful change or his vision. So I'd like to see that from him. But he's very good in the media. He reminds me a bit of Alec. He's good and he's likable. And he treated me a hell of a lot better than I was treated by Ian Blackford. So I'll always have a fondness for him. My
Are
life
any fun?
my life became a lot easier when Stephen became the leader of the Westminster Group. A lot easier.